Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. Great to have you with us. Jury deliberations officially underway in New York. Marxist Judge Merchant couldn't help himself from making a last-minute push to sway the jury, calling out individual jurors, telling them how great they've been and how much he appreciates them. Merchant explained the laws in question to the 12 jurors, and he reminded, helpfully, the jurors to set aside any personal biases, just like he has, of course, throughout the whole trial. Pretty ironic coming from a man as Marxist and biased and conflicted as he is. Merchant also noted the defense is not required to prove Trump's innocence. The burden of proof is on the prosecution. What a generous soul Merchant is. My kind of judge, huh? President Trump giving comment after the jury was dismissed. He says Mother Teresa couldn't beat these charges with a corrupt judge like Juan Merchant.
In listening to the charges from the judge, who's, as you know, very conflicted and corrupt, because of the confliction, very, very corrupt. Mother Teresa could not beat these charges. These charges are rigged. The whole thing is rigged. The whole country's a mess between the borders and fake elections, and you have a trial like this where the judge is so conflicted he can't breathe. He's got to do his job, and it's not for me, that I can tell you. It's a disgrace, and I mean that. Mother Teresa could not beat those charges, but we'll see. We'll see how we do.
But if anybody could, it would be Donald Trump. And now we wait on the jury. And of course, it looks like it could take as long as Friday, perhaps longer, in the minds of most of the so-called experts on juries and verdicts. Our guest today has been at the forefront of the effort to bring accountability to the CIA. Our guest, John Gentry, and he is the author of the book Neutering the CIA, Why U.S. Intelligence versus Trump Has Long-Term Consequences. And now, in the midst of all that is happening right now, whether it is the Soviet-style persecutions and trial of President Trump, whether it is the extraordinary destructive policies that the Biden administration is following, whether it is against Israel, whether it is, in point of fact, aligned with the CCP, there are conflicts aplenty right now for whomever wins on November 5th, and most likely that is President Donald Trump. And with us now, John Gentry. And John, I just really want you to give us a sense from your perspective as to what is happening with the intelligence agencies themselves in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of all of that, the spreading conflict that hasn't yet, in many cases, turned to war outright, but appears headed that direction.
Right. Well, the intelligence community, and especially the CIA, changed dramatically during the Obama administration for a number of ongoing cultural reasons and purposeful policies of President Obama and some of his people. And these changes manifested themselves in the outburst of activism by former intelligence officers on the one hand and current intelligence officers in the form of leaks starting in the summer of 2016. They continued all the way through the Trump administration. President Trump did not address this issue. The people who did this, particularly those in the intelligence community, got away with it. There were no repercussions. The Biden administration now has exacerbated, has pushed further some of the policies that generated the organizational cultural changes that led to the outburst. So you've had, in essence, a purposeful change in the organizational cultures of the intelligence community, along with the rest of the federal government, that are opposed to people who are not, frankly, concerned about really one topic that's a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. And since President Trump has indicated that he wants to change this and drain the swamp, so to speak, I expect that you'll see a reemergence of opposition to him later on this summer.
Yeah, if it's not already underway, right?
Well, to some degree, it is underway. Yes. So Mike Hayden, former CIA director, retired Air Force general, he's pretty active, right, in writing and on Twitter. A couple of others are less so. My guess is the leaks will take a little bit longer to develop, perhaps after the Republican convention in July.
Hayden is also, as you know, very active with the Atlantic Council. How big a reservation is this for former top officials of the CIA, top officials, government officials, but primarily CIA and the intelligence community? It seems to be a reservation for them from which to deplane or disembark.
Well, there is certainly some of that. We've had allies of the anti-Trump activists in the press, of course. So the media gave these people contracts to talk online. They gave them space on op-ed pages, and they've provided space in think tanks. And even the International Spy Museum, which you might have thought would be a commercial venture interested in the science, if you will, or the history of intelligence, it's got seven members of the Laptop 51 letter, the letter that tried to debunk the Hunter Biden laptop contents in October of 2001. 7 of the 51 are on advisory boards of the International Spy Museum. So some of the senior people who were active are still heavily ensconced, so to speak, in reputable organizations throughout the American society.
You know, we haven't talked about this before, but I'm just curious, as we're talking about, we now know those 51 veterans were liars all. We also know there was no repercussion, even for those among them who actually organized that letter to be a shield for Joe Biden in his second and last, it turned out, presidential debate in 2020. Does that embolden the intelligence community to again be as bald and bald-faced and raw in their intrusion into domestic politics?
Well, I suspect it will to some degree. I mean, people like Michael Morell and Mark Polymeropoulos, who were the orchestrators of this, have been significantly embarrassed. Morell has been quite quiet. Polymeropoulos has done just a little bit, but yes, there were no repercussions. I think this is an interesting case in a way in which you can have influence generated in ways that are not illegal, but are part of broader information operations. So, if I might, starting in 2016, the press basically coddled intelligence officers and said these people know everything about everything, and they're authorized and able to talk wisely about any part of domestic politics, including the strengths and the limitations of Mr. Trump. So the image of these people was built up, and in October of 2020, when the Hunter laptop contents were identified, the FBI had already determined that this was a real computer. It really was Hunter Biden's. But the Biden administration, in the form of current Secretary of State Antony Blinken, went to Morell and said, "Can you help us?" We know this from testimony to the Judiciary Committee last spring, in spring of 2023. And so at that point, they came up with a very weakly worded document that said, well, it sort of looks like it might be Russian information, the letter itself is very vague, but Politico, which had been part of this cabal, if you will, of trying to boost the credentials of intelligence officers, put in its headline, intelligence people say this is Russian disinformation. So it actually was a misrepresentation of the letter itself, but that served the purpose. So you had, in essence, intelligence officers and the anti-Trump press working together to generate an impression to voters that turned out to be helpful for Mr. Biden. Now, one of the people who received that solicitation told me personally that the solicitation that this person received specifically sought help for the Biden campaign. It was not to generate expertise, not to collect or recruit expertise on Russian disinformation techniques.
Morrell hasn't been coy about that at all, to my surprise.
He was told you need to testify about this under oath to judiciary, and though apparently he decided to come clean rather than have a felony rap.
Well, a felony rap, I don't think, would be entirely misplaced for those 51, because I infer from what you're saying that you have the same suspicion I do, and I'll just ask you. I believe every one of those 51 knew exactly how Politico would handle that headline, knew exactly how the left-wing media would proceed with that headline. Are we in agreement on that?
I think in general, yes. I certainly know specifically from one.
Right.
My guess is that the pitch was similar to the others, and the whole purpose of these so-called open letters, which had mainly been published by Politico, The Hill did some as well, but the whole point of these was to publicize the partisan political views of activist intelligence officers. And this was just one more in a long string of these efforts.
Well, again, your book on neutering the CIA, it seems they get more robust rather than enfeebled. We'll take that up when we continue with John Gentry, former CIA officer and great American. Stay with us.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back now. We're talking with John Gentry, author, former CIA officer, and, as I said, great American. It seems to me that something has occurred here in the intervening time period from Trump's leaving office and the ascension to this regime by Joe Biden, whoever he works for, who's ever his master or masters. It's clear the deep state has solidified, if you would, its presence, its influence, and has at the same time done something I didn't think would happen for some time. I was under that illusion, and that is they embraced this new cultural Marxism. Some call it, I just call it outright Marxism, on the part of the Democratic Party. Your thinking?
I think they have. There's been a dramatic change in the culture. I look at this issue in my book and identify 6 things that changed. 3 important ones. One is the emergence of into the workforce of a large number of young people who are coming out of the kind of college environment that we're seeing in 2023, Hamas and all of that. Marxism is rampant in major universities. these young people provided fodder for Senator and then President Obama, who made it crystal clear that he wanted to transform, to use his term, transform the federal workforce as part of a step to transform the country. And the key element of this broader policy was the diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. And what this did was change the composition of the workforce, change the political views of the workforce, and change the organizational cultures of the workforce. Obama had some very strong and effective, from their perspective, helpers, primarily CIA Director John Brennan and Director of National Intelligence Jim Clapper. Brennan particularly was effective in altering the CIA. He makes it clear in his book and in interviews with the Wall Street Journal and other workers who worked for him at the time have said, yes, he in fact tried to change the culture, and he encouraged us to be politically active. So he was effective in doing that. And when you add that then to the kinds of policy changes that occurred, diversity offices that have been created, you in essence now have a different kind of deep state. So in the political science literature, you think of Turkey and Pakistan and so on, but in the United States now, we've got a situation in which you had an ideologically motivated group of people who have created a moderate structure centered around the diversity offices, who are daily increasing and strengthening the ideological orientation of the workforce toward the DEI agenda. And as you say, this comes pretty directly from critical race theory, from critical theory generally, which goes back to the Marxists of the Frankfurt School in the 1930s.
Yeah.
So this is a long-standing effort, and it's fundamentally altering the country.
I think that people ought to know. In advance of our discussion here today, I took a look at the CIA website, one of them, and right there in front of God and everybody is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and all the rat trap lingo around it at the CIA, right on the front page, with the utter assurance that you won't have to be meritorious. You will not have to worry if you have the correct skin color and the perfect political outlook, then you just might be serving in the CIA. I mean, it's a terrible thing when I think about it. The Pentagon, the CIA, it is rampant across the Biden regime. They've insinuated this toxin into the lifeblood of this federal government, and to the point that it is frankly, it's useless and it's dangerous at the same time.
Yeah, well, I would not use the word useless. I would say it's actively dangerous. They're using this to purposefully change the way the government works, and this is headed toward a revolution. I mean, that's what the Marxists are trying to do.
John, when I said useless, it's useless for the American taxpayer, the American citizen, and all who are not a part of the approved identity groups that represent the push and the leadership of DEI and that fundamental transformation Obama talked about.
I understand what you mean, but we're not in disagreement. That I would go further and say that this has an actively negative purpose, and I think importantly, as much as President Obama and his appointees, again Brennan and Clapper in particular, as much as they did, the effort has been pushed much harder since January of 2021, and what we see now is a much stronger DEIA now. So President Biden has added an A for accessibility. So you've got a much stronger culture embedded now than we used to have. And this is now, I think, obvious to a lot of people, including some people who are advising President Trump. And that leads to the question, will a President Trump in a second term, if it comes to that, will he address this issue beginning in 2025? Open question, because he did virtually nothing in his first term on this. And my guess is that there will be some effort to address this.
There has to be, as you know, John, in part, which you lay out in your book, Neutering the CIA, is precisely what is the challenge before President Trump and in the new administration. That's what we're going to take up. We're talking with John Gentry, author of The Neutering of the CIA. We'll be right back. Please stay with us.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back. We're talking with John Gentry, author of The Neutering of the CIA, a former CIA officer himself, and as I said at the outset, a great American. Let me ask you this. With your experience, your knowledge, your insight, do you believe that CIA's fingerprints are all over our elections in this country? Because they certainly are over elections in many of the countries around the world.
I actually do not. This has been one of the concerns. I think that the leadership of CIA and other organizations do not have staff meetings in which they call in their senior subordinates and say let's figure out how we're going to launch policies to alter the country here now. I think they are culpable, though, in at least two significant ways. One is that they purposely created the organizational culture. The organizational culture that generated the reaction against Trump that I talked about. Mm-hmm. And secondly, they've done nothing to address it. And I think that there's some evidence that the senior intelligence people are working to help prevent an effort by a Trump administration to change things. So they're culpable in significant ways without directly doing the kinds of things that you're talking about.
Well, I had to ask that. And I also, as I was looking at this again, another CIA website, they were talked about the story of the CIA, which I thought was one of the most buffed and varnished accounts of the history of the CIA I could imagine, because it didn't start, for example, working with the French in Vietnam in 1954 and 53 and 54 under Eisenhower. It didn't start with John F. Kennedy or ordering up more special forces and help for the South Vietnamese. It didn't look to the assassination of the Jim brothers who were running South Vietnam 20 days before the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It's an interesting travail as well as a journey to watch, because the CIA has been engaged in the most important, I consider most important issues of our time. And I'm talking about from 45 on, you're thinking.
Well, they have been very involved. And of course, CIA started in 1947. put together pieces of the old Office of Strategic Services from World War II. But it was a new organization in the 40s. Got a little bit ahead of itself in terms of covert action in the coups against Iran and Guatemala in 53, 54. Bay of Pigs debacle was both an error by CIA, a big set of errors, and an error by President Kennedy. But the kinds of covert actions, use the intelligence, U.S. intelligence term, other countries use different terms, that you're talking about, diminished to a large degree in the mid 1970s. So the Congress put a kibosh on political activities and election tampering and so on. And as best I can tell, relatively little of that has gone on. There's been paramilitary ones, of course, Afghanistan in the 1980s.
Sure.
And so on. But an important point here, I think, is that for many, many, many years, in both operations and on the analysis side where I was, there was a strong effort to be honest, to be objective, to be non-biased in any way, including a political way. And there were institutional measures in terms of review and so on that were designed to counter biases of various sorts. But those began to break down, I think, in the 1990s. And then you had in the early 2000s with the influx of people after 2001, the kind of change in workforce orientation that I talked about earlier. So the agency was, I think, well intended for a long, long time through the end of the 1980s at minimum. But it's a very different organization now than it used to be.
Yeah, very different. And as we talk about, and we're going to have to talk about the history of the CIA. I think it'd be fascinating for the audience because, and I'm talking about the real history. For example, when you look at the Pentagon Papers, which is often overlooked by even journalists who are committed to the public's right to know, they haven't even read them. They are not even aware of who produced them, or the two news organizations that released them, despite the intimidating threat of the intelligence communities and indeed the Nixon administration itself. From that point forward, and there is the little matter of electing a former director of the CIA, George H.W. Bush. I mean, it's a remarkable period of history that had a lot of implications for what was to follow. John Gentry, it's always interesting to talk with you and always educational, and I have a hoot. So will you come back soon?
I was happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. John Gentry. He is the author of The Neutering of the CIA. And we're going to, the next time we talk, we're going to go about the business of neutering the CIA. CIA, be afraid of us. Here we come. We'll be taking up that discussion next when we talk with John Gentry. Great American. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for being here today. Thanks to John Gentry. And be sure to join us tomorrow when our guest will be cyber expert Harry Howery. Harry says election machine error rates violate federal law. He says Bill Barr is responsible for killing a massive fraudulent ballot investigation. And be sure to join us tonight for Lou Dobbs tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central on Frank Speech, Rumble, X, and Roku. Thank you, everybody, and God bless you, and may God bless America.